Hello and welcome to round one coverage of Grand Prix Phoenix. I'm Brian David Marshall. I am joined in the booth by Rich Hagon.
Hello.
And Pro Tour champion Jake Van Lunen. And there you see our opponents, our players, Dan Duncan playing Burn and Josh Gaxiola playing Nightfall.
Ooh.
Now, what is Nightfall, Jake?
So Nightfall is an aggressive creature deck that uses the combination of Knight of the Reliquary with Retreat to Coral Helm. And what that does is whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can tap or untap the Knight, and then you can essentially activate the Knight until you fill your graveyard up with a ton of different lands. Your Knight is super powerful, and you add a ton of mana to your mana pool, and you search up a Kessig Wolf Run, you target the Knight, and then you attack with a massive trampling creature and win the game out of nowhere. So it's a combo deck that is also just a very good value creature deck.
Here we see both players starting the game at 17 life, which is a very, very common sight. Fetch land into... there was no fetch land on the other side. I'm sorry. I saw the 17 and assumed there was a fetch land. So 17, 18. But, the shock land's a big part of the modern mana base. Here we see, one land hand for Josh Gaxiola with two Noble Hierarchs. And he even got an attack from a Goblin Guide in there and saw no land. Second land for Dan Duncan.
Someone suggests, Azul Mage says, Dan Duncan is clearly a superhero name. He's really Fred Smith, but he plays.
The Goblin Torch.
Yeah, he plays as Dan Duncan, hero of Burn.
Here is the Monastery Swiftspear, and both creatures get in. And did we find a land? No. Scavenging Ooze on top, but Josh Gaxiola has a Path to Exile, and he's trying to figure out where he's going to aim that.
Yeah, he has some options with this path. He could do something like block your Goblin Guide and then path my own Noble Hierarch because he knows he's not going to draw a land on the next turn. He decides to save himself as much life as possible, and he's going to go ahead.
Yeah, he paths the Monastery Swiftspear, more worried about that than the Goblin Guide, looking to maybe get some, hoping the Goblin Guide will do a little work for him, while it's also doing work for Dan. There you see Monastery Swiftspear, Haste and Prowess, a card that has made its mark on basically every format, from Standard all the way to the Eternal formats.
Josh faced with an interesting decision here. He could play a Knight of the Reliquary, but this Knight of the Reliquary is only going to have 3 toughness.
Lightning Bolt range.
Yeah, and it's not really when you want to be playing a Knight against these red decks. Once it has 4 toughness, it becomes a really, really potent card against them.
Well, here's a Lightning Bolt.
That was aimed at the face, right?
Yeah, that was aimed at Josh. I was just checking. I was like
that little finger just went dink.
No. I mean, Dan really is a superhero. No bird bolting here.
Right. It's just beneath him, isn't it? It's like,
Now, by the way, Josh also kind of not his lands are not flowing freely either. Oh, and still no land for Josh Gaxiola. Was that what was that on top there?
I believe it was Selfless Spirit.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And here's Atarka's Command, and that is going to get Spell Quellered.
Ooh, that's a nice one.
Oh, so there was a little gas in Josh's tank there. He's going to counter the Atarka's Command.
Yeah, and then he's going to block the Goblin Guide.
Wow.
Yeah, the 2/3 is going to eat the 2/2.
There we are.
And despite having one
wow,
land...
that's a great turn for Josh Gaxiola. Now he's got a Selfless Spirit, and he can actually kind of like start to construct a house of cards here.
Thing is, though, Dan, we've already seen there's a Lightning Bolt in hand. Now, that Scavenging Ooze could change things because of life gain.
All right, Spell Queller attacks. It gets 2 triggers from the Noble Hierarch, 2 Exalted triggers, and it gets in for 4. Yeah.
So when you're building your deck and you're putting Spell Queller in your deck, I think that's kind of the situation you're imagining. You're like lying in bed, snuggling with your freshly washed sheets, and that's what you want to happen.
If you need any insight into Jake Van Lunen's personality, you now have it. All right. So Monastery Swift Spear gets eaten by the Scavenging Ooze. A little precious life is gained back. And now that Scavenging Ooze can swing in for 5 with those 2 Noble Hierarchs.
God, just look at all that white mana sitting in Duncan's hand.
There's the Selfless Spirit. So that's going to make killing... you know what? Josh is just going to attack for 5 the old-fashioned way.
Yeah,
Could've
no white for Dan. This is just terrible.
Yeah, you see he's sitting on a Helix. Looks like 2 Boros Charms.
Yeah, that's all the burn he needs. Well, not quite now because of the life gain again on the ooze.
So here's another Atarka's command. And that's going to resolve.
And Dan needs to find a Sacred Foundry. He did.
Oh, it's very good, Jake. Did you install a new cam that looks X-rays through the player's decks from under the table?
But you know what? That Sacred Foundry is going to drop Dan to 7.
Yeah.
And he's going to pass the turn here. What is the play? Well, everything's going to attack.
Smash.
Josh. Yep, I've got a lethal attack on the board. This is 7. Can you stop it?
So here Dan has a few options. He has a Lightning Helix in hand. He could choose to aim the Lightning Helix at Josh himself, putting Josh down to 5. And then he has 5 points of burn in his hand. He just needs to draw either a red card or another white source to win the game if he does it that way. Or he could attempt to Lightning Helix one of these threats, thus perhaps giving him another turn to live in addition to this one. But
well, he's going to Helix the Selfless Spirit. But that's going to get another Spell Queller!
And that's all she wrote.
Wow.
All right, Josh Gaxiola, night falls on the burn deck. And we're going to game 2 here. Wow.
Very good. So there you see Dan Duncan, whose burn deck, he got punished for the green. He had double Atarka's command, which was the kind of good thing he was able to do, but sat there with a whole bunch of white cards that just were going nowhere.
But, you know, sometimes you want to complain about your mana to your opponent, you know. You can't. You had twice as much land as Josh.
Okay.
Josh did that all off of 1 land.
Josh Gaxiola, as you can see, is tier 2. That's a very nice shirt. I approve of that. Very good. You're watching MTG Launch with me, Rich Hagan, Brian David Marshall, and Jacob Van Loon. We're here for the first couple of rounds with you. And we're 1 game in to round number 1. They're pretty sluggish getting things underway here. So we had about 20 minutes of pre-game. So if you are just joining us, you've not missed a lot. We were chatting about the shape of modern BDM.
So you mentioned that tier 2 shirt. Josh Gaxiola is from Las Vegas, and he and his friends put together a team to sort of...
A raiding party, as it
Well,
were?
no, you know, for Magic, they're called tier 2. You know, they got shirts made, which, you know, makes them officially a team.
Yep.
And he's, you know, he plays, he's a dad and a husband when he's not playing Magic, and he has 2 kids, he said, but, you know, is looking to get better, you know, you know, have some better results in the game. And part of that is working with your friends, getting a team together, playing in some team events. And that's kind of what he's doing. His opponent, Dan Duncan, he's from Tempe here in Arizona.
Tempe? I have literally not heard of that.
Tempe?
Tempi?
E.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah, Tempe, Arizona, and big fantasy reader, he said. And he is looking for his first Grand Prix Day 2. He is really hoping that it is going to come this weekend.
Oh, awesome. Well,
he's really gunning for it.
Good luck to him. I recommend 3 colors of mana available at most times. That'll be the way forward. Some people in chat arguing that potentially the aiming for helixing the spirit was not a good play of his options. But then, as Waladil points out, guys, let's not be mean to Dan. He's a superhero. He doesn't have time to practice Magic the Gathering. So I think, you know.
I don't think, you know, with the Spell Queller, I don't think it much mattered where he aimed it.
That's absolutely true. With the Spell Queller in Josh's hand, he could have aimed the Lightning Helix at the wall, and it would have had the same result. So.
Tempe, incidentally, is literally 10 minutes away from the venue. It's where ASU is. It is literally next to the city. So,
I know this because of a conversation that I had 3 times with a woman sitting next to me on the plane on the way here.
Yeah. Jake actually Groundhog Day'd his flight. You'll have to ask him about it later.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
All right, so we're getting ready for game number 2 here in round 1. MTG Launch is the show. Modern is the format. And here with the call on game number 2 is Brian David Marshall and Jacob Van Lunen.
All right, here we go. Game number 2. Dan Duncan is going to be able to get a Sacred Foundry here and make sure he has his white, or can get his Stomping Grounds if he feels like he needs his green this time. No fetch lands in his first game, which really limits the access to all 3 of your colors in this burn deck.
Yeah, the combination of fetch lands and shock lands in Modern, that really gives people access to these beautiful, beautiful mana bases where they can reliably play 3 or even 4 colors at a time.
Yeah. So Monastery Swiftspear gets in, and 17 plays 19, and the turn passes to Josh Gaxiola. And then we're going to see the same thing. He's going to go to 16 here. And he's going to crack a Windswept Heath.
Against Burn, I really, really like just getting basics. I
and
like
that's
that
what he
Josh
does
is
actually
doing
here.
that.
Yeah, he's just going to get the forest.
By getting a shock land there, sure, Josh is fixing his mana. We just talked about how important that is for Modern mana bases. But you're essentially giving your opponent 2/3 of a card by searching up that shock land as opposed to searching up the basic. So here, Josh preserves 2 points of life, and he's still able to deploy that 1-drop.
All right, and remember, in game 1, he was on the play, and he did not know what he was up against when he opened up on a Temple Garden and 17 life. So Noble Hierarch comes down for him again. One of the harder working cards in the Modern format.
Just an unbelievably powerful card.
Oh, and here's Eidolon of the Great Revel.
This is in Masters 25, isn't it? I had to work very hard to not draft it last night.
I haven't seen it yet, but I believe you.
Yeah, it's like, Rich, this is not very good in your deck of 12 2-drops.
All right, well, it could be a real problem for Josh as well here. And he is going to crack another fetch land. What's he getting this time? He's sticking with the basic land plan, Jake.
And I like this a lot from Josh, especially when you're going to be battling against an Eidolon. The Nightfall deck has some interesting play against a card like Eidolon of the Great Revel. I have more than once playing these green value decks simply raced my burn opponent while letting them hurt themselves with the Eidolon of the Great Revel.
Here's a 4/4 Knight of the Reliquary. So that gets +1/+1 for each land in your graveyard.
And this has done so many absurd things over the history of the game that it's been in. Because it sounds so straightforward. It's like +1 for each land card in your graveyard. All right, so I've got 1 or 2. But the way people have been able to manufacture just how many land cards are in the graveyard is extraordinary.
Well, and if it lives a turn here, it just gets out of hand for the burn deck if they don't have access to something like Path, because killing a 5/5 is very difficult for this deck.
Yeah, I mean, even at 4 toughness, this is a very, very hard to deal with threat for Dan Deacon. He would almost certainly have to 2-for-1 himself in order to deal with it.
All right, well, there's another Monastery Swiftspear, and he's going to remember his Eidolon trigger.
Incidentally, you just said a very important word, Eidolon. I have seen a deck list of someone who is playing blue-white Eidolons as in this, and it is literally, it's like a Bogles deck, or Bogles if you prefer, except
well, that's
it is
clearly
just
a Boggle deck,
right,
because
right,
I boggle, but
yeah.
the mind boggles.
and it is extraordinary. It's like righteous authority and like all the and ethereal armor, and everything's just getting bigger, and eventually it gets cloud formed and hexproof and flying, and so if that wins some fairly small number of matches, we might try and get that into the feature match area.
Imagine playing Storm and your opponent's just like Eidolon of Rhetoric. Just like game 1. Just like slams it on the play against you.
Yeah,
right.
We'll see what happens with that. But meanwhile...
So Lightning Helix is being aimed at Knight of the Reliquary here. I don't believe that anything... Oh, he did block. Okay. So he blocked and... Okay. He did block there. Okay. Much better play. And Josh finds himself down to 12. Is that Gavany Township?
It is one of my favorite pieces of art in the history of the game. Take a look.
Yeah, passing the turn with 4 mana open now, Josh. This is a situation where if Dan has played a good amount of Modern, he can almost certainly expect Josh to have a card like Collected Company. Maybe something like Restoration Angel, but Collected Company is really what you're expecting your opponent to have in this spot.
Oh, please, Jake. Every time my green-white opponent passes with 4 mana up, they don't have... Oh, yeah, wait a minute.
They never have anything, do they?
All right, well, here's Lightning Bolt on Noble Hierarch. And Josh is going to tap it for mana.
Oh. But he's probably just faking.
Probably just faking here. Did Dan remember his Eidolon trigger? Okay. Goblin Guide. And now he is going to... Yeah, he's down to 9 here from his own Eidolon. He's going to declare at the end of his main phase here. And yes, there's a Collected Company.
Ta-da!
What will Josh hit? Let's look at the top 6 cards.
This is one of the,
Put up to
the
2
more
creatures
powerful
in play.
cards.
Wow, Tireless Tracker and Scavenging Ooze. And gets them in, by the way, under the Eidolon, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because he doesn't cast either of them. And the Collected Company does not trigger the Eidolon. That is a grotesque piece of art on the Scavenging Ooze.
Oh, bless. Can't help the way it looks.
Every part of the buffalo.
Now, what's the play here from Dan in the face of this board?
So this board is it's one of those situations where Dan wants to end the game. If he allows Josh to continue going, Josh has things that cost 4 mana. He can operate above that Eidolon. If he has another land in his hand, he might have another company even. If I'm Dan, I start aggressively getting in there. Currently, his Monastery Swiftspear is a 2/3 from that Lightning Bolt. That trades with either of the creatures on Josh's side of the board. That Eidolon is also a 2-power creature. That Eidolon is kind of dangerous for Dan to have in play. I think if I'm Dan, I would have wanted to have attacked with all of my creatures.
All right, well, Tireless Tracker steps in the way of the Goblin Guide. Rift Bolt gets suspended. And Josh's Scavenging Ooze gets to live another day. He also got a land off that Goblin Guide, by the way. He got a Forest.
And Forest is a very nice land to hit also with that Scavenging Ooze in play because it allows you to not play spells into your opponent's Eidolon. And
it allows you to not take 2 damage when you play it untapped.
Yeah, and it allows you to exile things from graveyards, thus gaining more life and getting your Scavenging Ooze out of range of something like that Rift Bolt there.
3 lands in a turn in chat says, I would attack with everything here. I actively want to trade creatures here. But look, if you're playing 3 lands in a turn, I'm not sure you're the most reliable guide to what should happen with creatures.
I don't think you want that Scavenging Ooze to live, but it might not here. Here comes the Rift Bolt. 2 triggers.
So with no cards in Dan's hand, this is somewhat elementary. Josh can simply exile a pair of creatures from graveyards. His Scavenging Ooze becomes 4/4 and lives through this Rift Bolt and puts him up to 14 here.
Yeah, and that's what he's going to do. You see the Tireless Tracker and...
Is that a hierarch? Oh, it's Knight he's going to send away.
Knight, sure, it doesn't really matter. I don't know what he has that's going to return stuff. He's going to gain 2 life. He's going to put 2 counters on the Scavenging Ooze. It looks like he was also sort of toying with that Plains. Perhaps has a
some of the type
perhaps
of
has like
trick.
a path or something in hand. And so sure, there's 3 damage on that Scavenging Ooze, and Josh will happily trade that for either creature if Dan attacks here.
I don't know. I'm at 14. He's at 7. If Dan attacks with both of his creatures here, I take it and I attack him back. What's he going to do? Cast a spell? Right? Like
Wow. That was so contemptuous. Like, what's he going to do? Cast a spell?
This is someone who's played against a number of Eidolons in his life.
Yeah.
So Dan attacks with just the 2/3 Swift Spear. It has the 1 prowess trigger. And Josh, he subscribes to the Jake Van Lunen newsletter. He does not block.
Uh-huh.
All right. There's a 5th land for Josh. Now he can also has Gavoni Township online here.
And if he attacks with this ooze, he's forcing a block here from Dan. If Dan doesn't block, Josh can simply activate the ooze a few times. It can't quite get to lethal, but can deal 6 damage, and then put Dan in a situation where Dan can't cast any more spells.
All right, well, Dan also subscribes to the newsletter, and he's
or the ooze letter.
Newsletter, oh, yes. Oh, I want to start a newsletter now. That's so good.
Yeah.
I hate to encourage you. You know that, but
Yeah.
the newsletter is
We're
fantastic.
scavenging for all the best. Would it be weekly or nightly? It would be the nightly ooze. Just put 6 more counters on it, and it can be ooze at 10.
So it looks like Josh has, some options here. He's thinking about his turn. He's at 12 now. He's not really afraid of much.
Right, whereas Dan is terrified. Well, maybe not that terrified of the scavenging ooze. Here's Searing Blaze.
Yeah.
There we go.
But this is, I think, largely an exercise in just playing all my cards while I'm on camera here, because he's just dead to this crackback. There's no cards in hand. Assuming that there are enough creatures.
I think that there are 2 creatures, and there's the Gavoni Township activation. So
Oh, and there's a spell queller for the Searing Blaze.
he's won in a wide variety of ways.
Block the Swift
Style
Spear.
points aplenty.
Yeah. Block the Swift Spear, they bounce. Eat 2 creatures out of your graveyard. Go up to 13. I now have a 6/6 ooze and a 2/3 flyer. You have no blockers, no cards in hand. Plus, he can activate a Gavoni Township if he wants to just see how high he can get the score. And just attacks. And that's the game. Josh Gaxiola, Nightfall, takes the first match here in round 1 at Grand Prix Phoenix.
All right, so there they are. There's Dan Duncan on burn. He did not get the job done. Josh Gaxiola, Tier 2, is 2-0 winner. He goes to 1-0 with Nightfall. We're going to bring it back to the desk here. Rich Hagan alongside Brian David Marshall and Jacob Van Lunen. Welcome to MTG Launch. Our first game and match is